And we're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Rabbi Sachs. It's really an honor for us to be hosting today this Global Day of Testimony, Yom Hashoah 2020, and it really is an honor to welcome you and invite you to share some thoughts on this special Yom Hashoah. I'm going to jump straight in. Sachs, you have met many accomplished and incredibly intelligent and erudite people in your time. What is it that you find most compelling about survivors? And especially as your latest book is about morality, do you feel that survivors are imbued with some special keen sense of morality? And is that what yourself and we all find so compelling and inspiring in engaging with them?
Well, let's separate the questions. And first and foremost, what have I personally learned from survivors? The short answer is that I have learned more from survivors than from any other group of people I've ever met. They have been my mentors, my tutors, my inspiration. Why? Because having gone through what they went through, having seen what they saw, simply to survive and more than survive, create new lives for themselves and their families and become the role models and mentors for us all, they have had to have had a strength of courage and a power of survival that is simply beyond our limited understanding. They have a physical, a psychological, and a spiritual strength that is awe-inspiring. And every element of their life is shouting out to us, as Moshe Rabbeinu said to the next generation, Uvacharta v'chaim, choose life. Doesn't matter that you have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, nonetheless, choose life. And some of those stories are absolutely unbelievable. 3 or 4 years ago, a man died just a month short of his 114th birthday. He was the oldest man in the world and one of the 10 oldest men ever in recorded history. And you would have thought a guy who can live to be almost 114 had an easy life. The truth is he was a survivor of Auschwitz. His name was Yisrael Kristall. He survived Auschwitz, went to Haifa, and made liqueur chocolates wrapped in sort of metallic wrapping. I don't know if you remember those chocolates, because all he wanted to do was make people happy. He had his bar mitzvah aged 113, because when he was 13, his mother had already died and his father was fighting in World War I. So at the age of 113, and he never stopped wearing talis and tefillin and davening every day. At the age of 113, he went onto the bimah, put his talis over as far as he could over all his children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. He said, look at all these. He said, one person could do, think of what 6 million might have done. I mean, this is an amazing man. And then I think, was it last summer, of Shoshana Ovitz, aged 104, who asked her, one of her children, to make a list of all her descendants. And unknown to her, the family actually decided not merely to make a list, but bring them all together. And they came together for her 104th birthday, and they were photographed against the Kotel. And there were 400 of them. 400 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I mean, can you believe this? Would you believe this? These are unbelievable stories. We talk about textbooks. There are such things as text people. These are text people. You want to know what is emunah? Look at these two people, Yisrael Kristall and Shoshana Ovitz. And the same is true for so many, 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 many others. So that's what I learned from the survivors, that you can come through anything. And somehow, if your faith stays strong, and maybe you lose it for a year or 10 or what have you. But nonetheless, you don't lose faith in life, and faith in life will eventually take you to faith in the author of life. Then you will do incredible things. That's number one. Number two, you asked me about, do they have moral authority to talk about questions of morality that perhaps others don't? Let me tell you a story. When Tony Blair asked me, when he was Prime Minister in 1999, would we like to have a Holocaust Memorial Day for the country? This was long before the United Nations made it an international day, January 27th. And I said, Prime Minister, you know, as Jews, we don't need it. We have Yom Hashoah. This is our day of grief for all of the members of our family, literally and metaphorically, that we lost. But there is a human dimension to the Holocaust. Primo Levi called his book about Auschwitz, not If This Is a Jew, he called it If This Is a Man. The Holocaust teaches us what it is to be human. So if we could take Holocaust Memorial Day and teach us all what it is to be human. And yes, center stage is the Holocaust, but we should focus on other people's sufferings as well. And he said, fine. Came 2004, we had the ceremony in Belfast. 2004 was the 10th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda, where Hutus murdered 800,000 Tutsis and their friends in 100 days, mainly by machete. And I'm thinking to myself, we're observing Holocaust Memorial Day, but we're also doing the Rwanda thing. How are these 80-year-old Middle European Yidden going to deal with young 20-year-old Africans? You know, you've got every culture clash there, every culture gap there imaginable. But the survivors said, no, we want to do this. Came the ceremony. All of my worries were completely disproved immediately. I discovered there is a Freemasonry of suffering. One survivor recognizes another survivor across every difference in age, color, and culture. They got on incredibly. 6 months later, the woman who'd been working with the survivors, a lady called Mary Kayatesi Blewett, a Rwandan, phoned me up and said, Chief Rabbi, I've got to come round and see you. Didn't know what she wanted. She came round, she was jubilant. She said, for 10 years, we, working with the Rwandan survivors, were working in complete obscurity. The only people who helped us were the Jewish community, and especially the Jewish community that dealt with the Holocaust survivors. And I want you to know that for all these years, we worked in obscurity and we didn't achieve very much. And all of a sudden, they've just made me International Woman of the Year. The Queen has just invited me to tea in Buckingham Palace. And best of all, the government has just given us money to build 3 AIDS clinics in Kigali, because one of the things they did was infect the survivors with AIDS. She said, I could not have done that without you and without the survivors. So what I saw from the survivors is that they took their pain and used it to sensitize themselves to the pain of others. And that is what gave them great authority.
Thank you. Let me move on to another question about Holocaust education and Holocaust remembrance. I think that understandably for a generation or two after the Holocaust, as a people, we were obsessed that we would not forget. We would not forget the families that we lost, the 6 million, the mothers, the fathers, the Bubbas, the Zaydas, etc. And we built museums and we gathered testimony and we lit candles. My question for you today, 75 years later, in the twilight years of the remaining survivors, in what way can we deepen the memory and the lessons to be learnt from the Holocaust and from survivors themselves that perhaps can move forward from the mantra of never again, we mustn't forget, we shall remember, huge museums of evidence, of testimony, of Holocaust deniers? How can we move this forward so that we can learn some lessons maybe a little bit deeper for future generations from survivors?
Naftali, there are two really, really different and distinct things here. Because Judaism is all about maintaining a balance between the universal and the particular. Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, humanity is precious because it's created in the image of God, and Chaviv in Yisrael Shenikrim Bonim Lamokim. We have a special family relationship with Hashem. So there's a particular and there's a universal. And both of them need a story. It's a different story. Let me explain what I mean by both of them need a different story. I will never forget the first time I did a Holocaust, a Yom HaShoah service in Hyde Park. I don't know if you remember how they used to be held out in the open in Hyde Park by that great big stone.
The Dell.
Al Eila Ani Bochia, for these I weep. And that year, there was a group of sixth formers who'd just come back from a school trip to Auschwitz. And they spoke about their memories, their feelings. And I was horrified, absolutely horrified, because all they came up with was trauma. It didn't belong to any story about anything. Auschwitz in and of itself, until you set it in a framework, is just a black hole in human history. You know, it swallows words, it swallows meanings. So there are two different stories, and I want to articulate them. Number one is the universal story. Have you ever been to the Holocaust Museum in Mexico City? Do you know this one?
Nope.
The place is unbelievable. I've forgotten the names. It was put together by two young girls, teenagers, 17. They took it. They each went on the March of the Living. They came back to Mexico City, which doesn't have many survivors because it's mainly Sephardim. And they said, hey, you know, do we do anything about the Holocaust here in Mexico City? And no. And because there were Jewish kids who went on March of the Living, they said, we're going to do something. And they did. You know, they started in one bedroom, you know, and the Mexican government learned about this and said, can we bring 1,000 kids a day into this, you know? No, to my bedroom, no, forget, you know. Oh, well, we better have a bigger one. So they find a bigger place. And then the president of Mexico or the prime minister says, but you're not in the center of town. It's got to be in the center of town. So they gave them space in the center of Mexico City, bang in the center. And these two still young women built a Holocaust Memorial Center, the like of which you've never seen. It's absolutely magnificent. Don't forget, there are only 40,000 Jews in Mexico City. I mean, but this was just two individuals. And it's on 3 floors. You start off on the top floor, which is dedicated completely to the Holocaust. Then you go down a floor and you deal with other genocides, like Rwanda, like Cambodia, like Bosnia, like Darfur. Because they're saying ours is not the only genocide. We want to embrace the suffering of others. Then you go down to the ground floor and all the prejudice that exists in society today. And you can't get out of the museum without committing yourself to volunteering from some group or other who's working against some contemporary injustice. Now, you've never seen anything more beautiful, because it is about the Holocaust, but it isn't. It's, as Primo Levi would say, if this is a man, if this is a human. These two very religious but very amazing young women have done something that I just haven't seen. You know, they raised the money, they did everything. So that's the universal thing. And that is what's done on January 27th. What is it to be human? But there's a Jewish thing. In 1995, do you remember I used to do these films for BBC television before Rosh Hashanah? So they said to me, you know, 50 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, please make your Rosh Hashanah broadcast from Auschwitz. Give, you know, please leave me out, you know. But they said, no, you must, you must, you must. So I said, okay, so long as I can tell the story the Jewish way. So they said, what's the Jewish way of telling the story? So I said, Matchil bigenut u'mesayim b'sheva. You begin with the bad stuff, but you end with the good stuff. So for 25 minutes of that half-an-hour program, it was Auschwitz. But for the last 5 minutes, we showed Yerushalayim Habnuya, rebuilt Jerusalem, and 5-year-old Jewish children at a Jewish school. So Auschwitz, in terms of a Jewish story, has to be chapter 1, not the last chapter. It's the Matchil Bigenut. And you have to go on a journey, you know, you have to, I think just as Chazal said, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki yilu yatzam miMitzrayim, we each have to feel as if we left Egypt. So Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki yilu yatzam meAuschwitz. We have to one night, one day a year, think to ourselves, I am part of that darkness, but I'm counting the days to the great light. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, but I want to push it a little bit further. How do we evolve it more down the line of that journey? Because for 50, 60 years, it was the survivors themselves and their children who were investing, I think, in preservation of memory. And I very much relate to that, which Rabbi Sachs is saying about the future. So how do we move it from the Gnut, how do we move it from Auschwitz to Yerushalayim, but not in a simplistic way? But how do we learn from the values of survival, the lessons of the Holocaust in a deeper way than things that have become today a little bit too cliched?
Personally, I don't know that the Holocaust can ever be cliched. You know, I read a great deal of Holocaust literature. It shapes my sensibility, it really does. The coronavirus has been a tough time for everyone. So whenever I have gone through tough times in my life, I've read Holocaust literature. And I've said to myself, if they came through that, am I not going to come through this? This is easy, this is nothing. So for me, because it's always a direct engagement for me, I'm always trying to read someone's story. I'm never reading statistics, I'm just listening to people's stories. You know, just a month or two back, I don't know, have you been to see it? Tom Stoppard, undoubtedly Britain's leading playwright, without shadow of doubt.
Yeah.
And I hadn't got a clue that Tom Stoppard was Jewish. But then Tom Stoppard didn't have a clue that he was Jewish until he was certainly in his 50s. His mother never told him. And finally, I imagine the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Britain really touched him and you know, energized all these submerged memories. And he wrote this play, which just was put on just before everything was closed down because of the coronavirus. called Leopoldstadt,
Sure.
which is about a highly assimilated Jewish family in Vienna, most of whom perished in the Holocaust. It's based on his family, but very loosely because his family didn't come from Vienna. And the trouble is, here's a highly assimilated Jewish family in Vienna, and most of them perish in the Holocaust. There's nothing beyond that. Are you with me? This is like my teenagers from the first Yom Hashoah. You know, there's trauma there, but it doesn't lead anywhere. So what for me are the living symbols of the actual narrative that leads from Auschwitz to light? Number one, the existence of the state of Israel. The fact that a mere 3 years after standing eyeball to eyeball with the angel of death, the Jewish people said in so many words, Lo amut ki echyeh v'asapem aseka, I will not die, I will live and give testimony to the God of life. I mean, the state of Israel is a way of saying we refuse to be homeless. And we refuse to be in a situation where we cannot defend ourselves. And we refuse to be regarded as different from all the other nations on the face of the earth. We have been connected to the land for long enough. Out of that darkness came this redemption of Hakamat Medinat Yisrael. The state of Israel is a direct part of the journey. The Holocaust doesn't explain the state. Avraham Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu explain the state, not the Holocaust, but that's number one. Number two, the Eda Charedit. They often get a lot of flack from anyone who's not a member of the Eda Charedit. Mind you, that's measure for measure because they give as well as receive flack, so there you are. The truth is, what did they do? They had children. That's why Shoshana Ovitz had so many people. You know, they were trying to bring 6 million or 1.5 million murdered Jewish children back to life again, in so many words. So I look at the restoration of the state of Israel. I look at the restoration of the Jewish people, and then I look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. I mean, Naftali, do you know of any previous outreach in Jewish history? Reb Moshe of Kusi in the Smag went on a tefillin and mezuzah campaign in the 14th century. But I mean, you know, that's the only precedent you can think of. And the Chabadniks know this about me, that I asked the question, why did he do what he did when nobody had ever done it before? And I said, the only thing I can say is, if Hitler searched out every Jew in hate, the one tikkun he could do was to search out every Jew in love. So I see those three parallel journeys of Chabad, Yeda Charedit, and the state of Israel. And I tried to do two other things, Naftali, and you've been part of the outreach and part of all that we did. I tried to build so many day schools that we could say what so many died for, our children and grandchildren will live for. That was part of my tikkun. And the other thing that I did, and a lot of other people do, is the interfaith. Because there was a lot of religion somewhere along the line in the centuries-old tradition of anti-Semitism. And I think where Jews and Christians met as estranged from one another, today, by and large, they meet as friends, respecting one another. So these are 5 paths that I hope show. And not every one of us, you know, not every one of us is a Haredi and not every one of us is a Zionist, but I think there are paths for each of us. And we each, it's a responsibility for every one of us to say, can I redeem some of that pain and darkness?
Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. I'm going to ask you one last question, which is quite often in Jewish history, we've lived through traumatic times and tumultuous events, and it's taken a number of generations to establish the commemoration of that event. It happened with Purim, it happened with Hanukkah, it happened even after the destruction of our temple. Generations later, they asked the question, Alma, in 100 years' time, what do you think will be the enduring lessons that we've learned from survivors and that we have inculcated in ourselves about the Holocaust? We're still living in that generation. We couldn't really ask these questions in this generation, but in 100 years' time, what form will Yom HaShoah, will Holocaust education, what enduring lessons will there be for our great-grandchildren, future generations?
It's a very deep question, actually. It's very interesting that if you look in the Chumash, in Parshas Bo, you find 3 of the children of the Haggadah. V'hayu ki yomru aleichem b'nechem, that's the Rasha. V'hayu ki yisholcha b'ncha malcha, that's the Tam. And v'yigadatu levincha b'yom hahu, that's the She'eino Yudei L'Shel. The question of the Chacham is in Parshas Va'etchanan. What is the difference between Parshas Bo and Parshas Va'eschanan? Answer, 40 years. So it can sometimes take 40 years to ask the right question, let alone formulate the right answer. I'm seriously disturbed, and I have been for a very long time, that we have not yet achieved a generally accepted and normative form of service for Yom HaShoah. I think it's a terrible, terrible mistake, frankly, is the fact that we have a Haggadah and we have a Seder that is responsible for Jewish identity being handed on from generation to generation. And without that ritual, we wouldn't do it. It's an incredible, incredible thing. You know, there's an English philosopher, he's Jewish, but not terribly engaged, called Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton, whom I know and respect greatly, I had several conversations with, public ones, and he published a book called Religion for Atheists. And in this book, he says, what a wonderful thing Yom Kippur is. He says, what a shame we only have it once a year. Because he says, would you ever really get around to apologizing if you didn't have Yom Kippur? You know, so once you've got the date in the diary and you've got a ritual, stuff happens. And I don't think the Seder and the Haggadah happened overnight at one moment. It's a gradual accretion over time. But somehow or other, as you know, there have been a lot of problems. Which date did you choose for a tragedy that went on every single day for 5.5 years, and more if you consider from the first anti-Jewish decrees in 33, 6 years earlier? I put together a service. Did you ever come to it, Naftali? We did it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, for Yom HaShoah, sure.
You know, and I was trying to sort of build up a service which had a little bit of survivors' testimony, but had music words,
yeah,
and so on. I think it probably didn't quite survive because it hasn't happened since I stopped doing it. So I'm still working on this. But it does seem to me that the time will come when we will say, you know what? We won, despite everything. You know, I was in the Altneuschule in Prague for the 70th anniversary of Kristallnacht. The Conference of European Rabbis was there. We had about 250 rabbis. They never had 250 rabbis in the Alt Neuschul. And I'm thinking, 70 years ago, they thought, that's it, that's the end. And they only ever saved the shuls, the 5 shuls in Prague, because they had them scheduled as museums of a dead civilization. And Hitler and Nazi Germany were dead, and here were rabbis from the whole of Europe, including Eastern Europe, where Jewish life had been suppressed for all those years. And I think this story that you and I are part of, and our children, and when you should get that old in good health, your grandchildren in the fullness of time, we are part of one of the most extraordinary stories ever. And the story of the Jewish people after Auschwitz will take its place alongside the story of the Jewish people leaving Egypt. And don't think I'm making this up, because it's an explicit verse in Jeremiah chapter 23, you remember? Vinei yamim ba'im nu'um Hashem, yeah? The days are coming, says God, when asher lo od, when it will no longer be said, long live God who brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, Elochai Hashem asher ha'elav asher hevi et Israel me'eretz tzefona mikol ha'aratzot asher hidakatim otam shama. But it will be said, long live God who brought the Jews back from the lands of the north and from all the countries where I had scattered them. Jeremiah said, there will come a time when we will recognize that a story has happened to the Jewish people that is in its way even greater than the story of going out of Egypt. And that will be the story which will begin with the Holocaust and end with Geula Shlema Bimhera B'Yameinu. Amen.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. We invite everybody else to continue with the JRoots Day of Global Testimony and with the program on our Facebook page. Thank you, Rabbi Sachs.